Hello and welcome everyone to the latest City University of London European Social Survey and NatCen Survey Methods webinar. I'm Tim Hanson. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at ESS Headquarters in London, and I'll be chairing today's session. We're very pleased to welcome Bella Struminskaya, who will be our speaker today. Bella is an Associate Professor of Methodology and Statistics at Utrecht University and an affiliated researcher at Statistics Netherlands. Her research focuses on the design and implementation of online mixed-modal smartphone surveys and passive data collection. Today, Bella will be presenting on the topic of designed big data, augmenting surveys with sensors, apps, wearables, and data donation. She'll look at the potential for new technologies to measure facts or behaviours that can be difficult to measure through self-report surveys, drawing on results from several randomised experiments, and she will consider what opportunities and challenges these new approaches raise for social sciences and official statistics. Bella will talk for around 40 minutes, so there'll be time for some questions after that. If you do have any questions, please type these in the Q&A area and we'll go through as many as we can. So I'll now hand over to Bella.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and present my research from the couple of past years on designed big data. And this research is a joint work of many people. So I would like to shortly acknowledge them from my own university, Utrecht University, but also from Statistics Netherlands and other universities, both in the Netherlands and abroad. So, we are in the survey methodology webinar. So this is no surprise, I think, to any of you that the starting point, the problem is that the survey response rates are falling and have been falling for quite some time, and not only across time, but also across countries. And at the same time, people are using in everyday life more and more devices, such as smartphones, wearables, in-home sensors, and, of course, computers, tablets. So the question is, can this new technology, as it becomes ingrained in everyday lives of people, be a solution to the falling response rates? And I would like to start with one example, a study which was prominently published in Nature on the physical activity, on the inequality of physical activity across countries. So I like this study because what researchers did is that they took the data from an app, which was just a commercial app developed for tracking steps that people took every day. And then they looked across countries where people are more mobile and where they're less mobile. Well, according to the results, somehow here people in Russia seem to be very mobile, people in some other countries less mobile. What I like about this study is that if we are to think, let's draw a sample, have a probability-based survey, ask people about their physical activity behavior, this would be much more expensive and much more cumbersome to implement logistically. But there are, of course, caveats in using these new methods. And since we are in a survey methodology webinar and I am a methodologist, I would like to take the total survey error perspective and look into this study with this in mind. So first of all, the study only focused on iPhone users. So this app was only available to iPhone users. And secondly, these were only volunteers. So there was not a random sample. So everybody who could, who wanted to download the app and track their physical activity was a participant then. And only those who downloaded an app. Well, researchers adjusted for age, education, and gender. But if you think about it, the population that they're studying is smartphone owners, and they need to adjust to this population. But the characteristics of smartphone owner population across countries especially are not always known. Then we also think about, what can happen on the measurement side, and the device can, for example, malfunction or be out of power, so no measurement will be performed. Then also device carrying patterns differ. They differ by gender, for example, men and women. Women carry them in their purses, as research by my colleagues from the University of Mannheim has shown. So there is also a potential problem with the construct validity. And then also processing, things can happen there. So one needs to recognize different types of activities, so walking from jogging and so forth, to differentiate them. And depending on whom the data was trained, right, the algorithm was trained to recognize these patterns. For some of the groups, it may be missing those. So this is not to say that, using these new technologies, using apps and sensors is suboptimal. Here is another study which I like very much, which was done by Naomi Suji, where she basically took a census of 133 parolees in New Jersey, so men recently released from prison, and she equipped them with phones, Android phones, and these phones collected geolocation, calls and texts. Well, not the content of those, but the behavior. Also, they sent short questionnaires, ecological momentary assessment. And what the researchers found out is that there was a spatial mismatch. So the low-skilled, non-white job seekers were located within central cities, but job opportunities were located elsewhere. And then this mismatch lengthened time to employment. But if people were mobile, this could compensate for these residential deficits. So Naomi Suji and her colleagues say that this findings, this study, they couldn't have performed without passively collected data, without collecting this data about geolocation, because it wouldn't have been possible to self-report. So what is not a caveat, but a characteristic of this study is that this is a small group, right? So what if we were to take it to the... And here comes this design big data approach that is in the title of my talk. So when we start from the population registry for countries which have those, or from a sampling frame, draw a sample, then some people respond to our requests, some people do not respond, so they become non-respondents, and some people are not covered, so they don't have devices. Then some people agree to participate in a study with apps, wearables, sensors, and some people do not agree, so do not consent. And what is nice about it is that at every step of the way, because we are starting with a probability sample, we can look into this different types of errors. So if you will, that's the total survey error flipped on its side, and that's the representation side of it. In my talk, I would like to focus on this non-consent, non-participation error. We're also looking into other errors, but due to the time constraints, that's the one I chose. So what are the mechanisms of sharing app, sensor, and digital trace data? I would like to present to you 3 recent studies done in collaboration with colleagues from the Netherlands and from Germany. They were all published, so if you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask me, but you can also read up more on that. And the most recent 2 studies were done in the Dutch, in the Netherlands, one with the general population cross-sectional, which was the people who participated in at least one survey of Statistics Netherlands. Another was done in the probability-based list panel of the Dutch general population. And the third one was done in Germany in a non-probability panel, where we in all of these studies asked for willingness to share data, and in the most recent one also actual sharing. So the tasks for respondents were to download, well, hypothetically, willingness to download a tracking app, willingness to share geolocation photos and videos, and in the most recent one, they were actually asked to share this GPS location photos and videos. It was not done with an app because we thought that downloading an app is an extra step which can increase non-participation. So the Dutch and the German studies were done in 2 waves, and I will tell a little bit more about this. So with all studies, the participants were randomly assigned 2 requests, and the conditions that we varied were autonomy over data collection. So people were told you can revoke, view information that you're sharing and revoke the measurement. benefit framing, the survey will take shorter if you share this passively or actively collected data through smartphones and tablet. And also additional confidentiality assurance, so that the statistics netherlands in this case will treat the data confidentially, no access to of third parties will be granted to the data, and so forth. So this was done in addition to the standard confidentiality assurance. In this study, we had fixed order of measurements. In the other ones, we also varied the order. And in all of the studies, we asked on privacy concerns, technological skills, previous experience with sensors, with research apps, and also survey experience. So this is how this study looked like. And apologize for having the text in Dutch, but basically it says that in addition to the questions that we are asking in the study, we would like to ask you to share geolocation. Would you do so? A yes or no? And the other conditions, so basically this was benefit, autonomy, and privacy were shown. So this was a 2x2x2 experiment, right? So either, for example, the benefit framing was shown, or autonomy or privacy, or all of this could be viewed by respondent if they were assigned to this group. This was how we visualized the GPS measurement, and I will come back to this design decision of visualizing the location of the participant. And for the camera-related tasks, for taking photos and videos, the participants were guided to their native camera app on their phones. So across these all studies, we had similar mechanisms. So we added also sponsor for those which were hypothetical, because in the actual one, we couldn't vary the sponsor. And in the German study, we also included the duration topic, whether they would get different incentive amounts, and also whether the app would also ask additional questions. And as I said, across the board, we asked about privacy concerns, tech skills, and experience before. So what are the results? What do we see in terms of willingness and actual sharing? And here is the most recent study, the Dutch cross-sectional study. So we see that the willingness to share geolocation is the highest. So there's 67% of people who said, yes, I will share my geolocation. This was one-time sharing. And then under 20% said I would be willing to share my photos or videos. So you might be asking yourself, why did we choose these tasks? So photo of the house can be used in a survey on housing, on living condition. Video of surroundings also was a use case for the living conditions survey. Photo of receipt is for the household budget survey, where basically taken photos can substitute self-report, which is quite cumbersome. And photo of oneself was our addition, because we decided that this was most sensitive and wanted to have it as a benchmark. So how did it look like when we look at the actual sharing? So conditional on willingness. So out of those who said that I would be willing to share my geolocation, about 70% share the geolocation. So combined rate is about 46%. And for the camera tasks, everybody who said, yes, I will share photos or video did so. So this is a bit different from the hypothetical willingness that we asked about in the Dutch probability-based list panel. So we saw that the hypothetical willingness to share, for example, a photo of the house was much higher. So here, definitely yes and probably yes, is about 40% than the actual sharing. What we also saw in this hypothetical study is that the order plays a major role. So the highest willingness was for the task which was asked first. So for example, for geolocation, when it was asked first, the 41% of participants said, yes, I'm willing to share it. But when it was asked last, only 26% said, yes, I'm willing to share my geolocation. So for those who are considering to collect these measures in their surveys, and if you are considering to collect multiple measures, I would say start with the most important one. Now, does it make a difference whether we add this phrasing about autonomy, about being able to control the data collection, about benefit framing, and about privacy? A lot of null findings, as you see here. So only autonomy significantly increased the willingness to share geolocation and photos of receipts. And this was also, so this is actually contradicting what we found in the second Dutch study. So there, the order of requests, as I've just shown you, was a significant predictor, with one asked first getting higher willingness, and the sponsor. So if the study was sponsored by the university, then the willingness was highest, followed by the official statistics agency, and then official statistics agency didn't differ significantly from market research. And this is interesting because in the German study, actually it was done in the online access panel, which was housed at the market research firm. And then the willingness was also highest for the university, but then on the second place was the market research, and then on the third place was the official statistical office. So basically, there seems to be something going on with trust. People trust this market research agency, or people trust the university at which the list panel is housed, the results presented here, and then they're willing to share it with this sponsor. Benefit framing had a slight negative effect. So this is maybe not surprising, because these people are participating in online surveys every month. So they are used to self-report, and they're used to answering surveys, so they don't mind. The privacy effects were not significant. So additional privacy assurance did not increase willingness or actual sharing. But if we're looking into privacy concerns and their effect on willingness, the results were mixed. In some of the studies, we found that the more concerned people are, the less they're willing to share. In one of the studies, not. In all of the studies, significant effects were of smartphone use behaviors. So the more functions on smartphones, such as taking photos, sending text, browsing social media, and so forth, people were doing on their smartphones, the more willing to share, and the more they shared the data. And also attitudes towards surveys and prior app download positively associated with sharing. So this concerns, the privacy concerns, and this interesting effect of no effect of additional confidentiality assurance, we wanted to dig a bit deeper. And here's the study which Florian Keusch and myself did in the list panel, also this Dutch probability-based panel, where we asked people how concerned they are about different pieces of information. So if one were to share information about apps people use on smartphone, or GPS, share text message surveys, and so forth. And we see that the more active the task is, so for example, using the camera for collecting information to share them with researchers, the less concerned people were, with the except of text message survey, which we cannot really explain why this happens. Maybe people thought that we are asking them to share the content of the text messages. And these findings with the active versus passive data collection, we also see similar results in Austria, in Germany, and in also non-probability based panels, which I don't have time to present to you, but I can give you a reference to this book chapter and where we published this. So this privacy concerns and other factors, to summarize, make these decisions about sharing very nuanced and situation specific. So also hypothetical behavior, as we saw, differs from actual participation behavior. And the nature of the task, so for example, taking a photo of the house or taking a photo of oneself is more relevant than the answer, so then using the camera, for example. It is very important to communicate who asks to share and for what purpose, which is in line with the paradigm or theory of privacy in context of Helen Nissenbaum, where she argues that information by itself is not private or public, but one would share a piece of information, for example, with the doctor, but expect the doctor not to gossip with their wife over dinner about this piece of information. And it's also important to strike a balance for researchers between maximizing sharing and providing detailed information about the data. So you saw that the decision that we took to visualize geolocation caused the sharing to drop. So you could say that this is a backfire effect. The sharing went down, but at the same time, we as researchers want to be transparent and want for the participants to know what information they're sharing with us and to understand and give us truly informed consent. Also, the reason why this privacy assurance didn't work, in my opinion, could be ceiling effects, because people already were trusting the sponsor. So they were loyal and thought, well, yes, Statistics Netherlands is asking me to share this information. I am already assuming that you are going to handle my information carefully and not share it with third parties and so forth. So how much does this non-participation matter? Because, well, this participation and non-participation rates, which are under 20% for camera-related tasks, about 40% for geolocation, is one thing, but non-response or non-participation bias might be big or might be small. So this is what we did. We linked this survey and sensor data with registries, and there were many registers from which we linked the information of the participants to the survey, and looked at non-response bias and non-participation bias based on these variables that we had from administrative data. So non-response bias we defined as the differences between proportions or means of the respondents and the gross sample, and the non-participation bias is the difference of consenters, so those who share the data, and respondents, so those who participated in the survey. And here are the variables that we chose to look into, and you can see also the extent of non-response bias, so those who are not participating in the survey. So overall, well, I would encourage you to not look that much at this stars, significant stars, but at the value of the bias. And this seems to be quite small. I don't know if you can, I hope you can see my mouse. So on average absolute bias is 2.1 percentage points. How does it look like for these different tasks? And we see that, well, some of the biases are quite large, so almost 8 percentage points. And what we also see is that overall, although if we take them across the variables, they are all not so high, but it depends, of course, which variable we are looking at. And it doesn't make much sense to look at all the variables at the same time, because ideally how to look into non-response bias, for example, for share and geolocation is I'm not willing to share my geolocation depending on where I am. Maybe I am at a location which I perceive as sensitive, such as church, children's school, something else, and then not willing to share, but in on a street, I'm willing to share this. Of course, we don't have the location of the participant in this particular study. So we are taking what can be approximated. Oh, sorry, I'll come back to this this later on. So what I was talking about was the taking the approximation of mobility, how mobile a participant is. So here we see that owning a car and having a driver's license is, or for example, living in an urban area is related to mobility. And we can also do this exercise with the sharing of video of surroundings, which can be used for housing survey. Also looking just at the variables homeowner and urbanicity, which can be related to the type of community. The same way, for example, for sharing the photo of the house, which can be used in the survey on living conditions, we can look at the size of township and homeowner. And then for the photos of receipt, we can look into whether a person is in paid work, income percentage, and look in their financial situation. So just to go back to the point that I wanted to make as well, is that if we look at the biases, sometimes they aggravate each other. So non-response bias, being a non-respondent at a survey, goes in the same direction as the non-participation bias, so not sharing a certain sensor or app related task. But in other cases, for example, as for this variable homeowner, we see that they mask each other. So they go into opposite directions. And if I were to just look at shared receipt for the variable owner, I would think that there is no bias, but it's just because it's not that it's canceling each other out, it's just masked under this non-response bias. So the next question I want to give you some insight on is, does this also hold for digital trace data? So data that people do not actively engage in collecting. And here is an example from the study that we're doing in collaboration with researchers from University of Amsterdam, which is called Project Awesome, where they're looking at the behavior of adolescents, their well-being, and their use of social media, and asked an intake survey with the topics of social media, well-being, social relationships, self-regulation, as well as bi-weekly surveys. So you can see that 16 surveys here were asked throughout the course of this study. There were also 2 ESM, so experience sampling method studies, where participants who were teenagers, about 13 to 15-year-old in the Netherlands, they got these questions about 6 times a day for 3 weeks. And these teenagers were recruited at school, so that required their consent and also their parental consent. And overall, about 400 participants started with the study. So about 80% of them had Instagram accounts, and in the 16th wave, in the last wave, they were asked to share information from their Instagram archives. So just to go to Instagram, request their data, download it on their device, and share the raw data with researchers, which then was anonymized. And about 32% donated their Instagram data. So this was not a methodological study. Researchers focused on different characteristics of teenagers, but because they had so many characteristics, we could look into whether those who donated and those who didn't donate data differed on sociability, on psychological characteristics, on their use of social media and smartphones, and also by study design. So we see again that privacy is key, where people who scored more higher on this scale of adolescent disclosure and secrecy were also more likely to donate their data. So higher meaning that they were more likely to talk with their parents about what they're doing on the internet, on social media. What we also saw is that those who completed the second experience sampling method sweep were more likely to share their data. So this we also think is the loyalty effect. There were some other differences between those who donated and those who didn't, for example, in self-esteem and self-regulation, which could be problematic if researchers just use this digital trace data for looking into psychological characteristics of teenagers. But the good news is that from all of these other characteristics, there were no significant differences between those who donated and those who did not. So how to deal with privacy concerns? One solution is to give agency to participants. So we saw in the study on apps that people were more likely to share their geolocation and to share their photo receipt if they were told that they have agency, they can view the data and revoke the consent later on. And with my colleague Laura Buschhotten from Utrecht University and also colleagues from other 6 universities in the Netherlands, we're working on this privacy preserving data donation workflow. How it works is that a participant who is on a digital platform such as Facebook, Meta, Netflix, or has a device which, for example, collects their steps, such as an iPhone or an Android or smartphone, can request the data from the collecting party. So any of you can go to Facebook, take out and then request the data that Facebook has on you. This data is then downloaded to participants' device, to respondents' device, and processed locally. So what does it mean locally processed? That the researcher does not yet see any information, no information is transferred to them before the participant actually inspects the data and has an opportunity to also, for example, delete some rows of the data if the researcher so wishes. And then after the participant gives this truly informed consent, the data reaches the researcher for data analysis. So this is a project on which we're working with 6 universities in the Netherlands and developing this software, which we call PORT, which has the key feature of agency of changing the data or looking at the data. And this is, in the first instance, is going to be developed for Google and its products, Meta and its products, Twitter, Netflix, and Spotify. My role there is looking into methodological questions, so whether people understand consent, whether this is representative, those who share the data from those who were asked, so there are differences between those two groups. User experience, so if you want which buttons to place where on the screen to make this understandable for people and also increase donation, but also measurement quality and validity and reliability. So just to give you an example what this donated data might look like, this is the data from one person, which is not from the study participant, but from our pilot, so one of us, where the data comes from Google location history package, and it is classified here by activity, which is performed by Google already, and it's for the 6 years from 17 to 2022. So just the point of this slide is to show how detailed it is. If we were to ask a person about their travel behavior, then we would not have been able to get this detailed data, and especially that far in the past. So to look into different methodological aspects of data donation, we implemented a study in the center panel, which is a probability-based panel similar to the list panel, but which has been not updated as frequently. So it's used usually for conducting studies which are maybe more innovative in nature than the list panel studies. And we invited about 1,035 participants, about 75% of them actually participated in the study. They were all smartphone owners and integrated the survey, the center data infrastructure with PORT, with the data donation software. We asked about the willingness to donate the Google location history information, and about 30% were willing to do so, and about 144 did about 14%, so 144 did donate their data. The methodological questions that I'm going to focus on in this presentation were visualization of the data prior to request. So in the software, before donation, everybody sees what their data would look like, but we are asking in the questionnaire, are you willing to share this data with us or not? And showing an example might help or might actually hinder if participants are maybe more concerned through seeing this example. So the second question was understanding the consent request, and the third was to see whether incentives play a role. So we were the incentive amount of 5 to 10 euros. We didn't have the €0 condition because we know from the literature that paying something is always better than paying nothing. So to check the understanding of the consent request, we made a quiz, if you will, and asked half of the sample to exclude the influence of these questions on the actual donation about whether these statements that you see on the screen are true or false. So the statements were like, you are asked to download information from Google, and this is a true statement, or Google collects information on location about everyone, which is false. And then here you can see the percentage of correctly answered and percentage of incorrectly answered, and also we provided a don't know option. So the key feature of the software that people are able to inspect the data before sending it to center data, we see that most participants understood that this was true. But it is also concerning that there is a high percentage of incorrect answers or don't know answers. And that can be because of the burden. People just don't want to read this and answer the questions, or it can be because we are not asking clearly and explaining clearly. So does this understanding influence the donation? And also, what does it look like with respect to incentives and visualization? Well, for incentives and visualization, again, no difference. So no difference in the incentive amounts, and also no difference in this showing the example, which you can see on the right. So this was a hypothetical table that was shown to people how their data would look like. So extracting the year, the month of the year, and the hours which they cycled, and the distance in kilometers which they cycled. So what about the understanding? It had an effect. So about 5.5% had everything correctly answered, and the mean of the correct questions was about 3 median 4 out of 7 statements. People with more correct answers were also more likely to be willing to donate and more likely to donate. So you can see here the odds ratios of 1.5 and 1.8. And this might, of course, be also connected to, for example, that education, that people who are more educated are also more likely to understand the request. So we looked into what characteristics are predicting this willingness to donate, and education indeed. Education indeed played a role. So those who had a higher education were more likely to be willing to donate, as were men, and those who trusted Google. But for example, privacy concerns and this ability to download files, we didn't find any effects on that. For self-assessed smartphone skills, so assess your skills from beginner to advanced, we didn't see a significant effect, which is in line with the studies I presented before on apps and wearables. And the number of smartphone activities is also in line with what we found for sharing geolocation or photos and videos of receipt and of surroundings and so forth, is that the more activities people performed on their smartphones, the more willing they were to donate. So conditional on willingness, we still see that males donated more than females. It was so in this case in the panel, they all asked the gender as a binary variable, and also age. Those who were younger were more likely to donate than those who were somewhat older. So there's still a lot to look into. So this is just a first glimpse into the data, and how to give this agency. So this is the agency for digital trace data, how to give agency for app studies. So one is, for example, to provide feedback to participants. And here is the example of giving feedback about the spending behavior from the household budget survey, which was carried out in the Netherlands, Spain, and Luxembourg. And participants were also randomized into 2 groups. So one group was provided information that they will receive this feedback, and the other group was not. Well, everybody did in the end, but we saw that the promise of feedback actually did not have any significant effect of the willingness to participate in this app-based study and on participation. Another example is also an app developed. So this household budget app was developed by Statistics Netherlands. Another example is the second version of the travel app, which gives the possibility to participants to provide context to passive data and add data points. So they can also delete some data points. So basically, this also uses this control autonomy condition to, well, in essence, help respondents to make their experience more pleasant and to collect the data that they actually want to share with researchers. So, so far, to summarize everything I've talked about, is that there's still a lot of unknowns into the mechanisms of sharing data through app sensors and data donation. What I didn't show you is the stability of willingness, where we showed that this, we asked this twice in the Dutch list panel, and showed that the stability was moderate. So people who said, yes, I'm willing to share geolocation the first time, did not necessarily say yes again. So people might have a stable preconception, but also it might be very situational, depending on the measure, depending on the study. So this is also why we might not have seen this effect of visualization or effect of incentives when we looked into donation of the Google location history. But at the same time, this panel was a panel used to test innovations. So the plan is to study different populations and different data types. The understanding of consent request is not high, as we saw. And what we are doing now is further experiments on testing the length of the request, the content of the request, how it is presenting, and cognitive interviewing to walk through these processes with participants to see where the pain points are located. We also see that about half of the participants willing to donate does not make a donation. So this cognitive interviewing will be helpful there also to identify why this is happening. We asked for the reasons, and there, not surprisingly, people say privacy concerns, but it is very broad, right? What does it mean in practice is not quite clear. Then next on the agenda is to look into the quality and validity of donations. So can we actually measure the construct that we want to measure, let's say travel behavior, with this data? And whether the level of aggregation, so here we aggregated for the month, but does it make a difference that we ask for raw data, so just share the whole package with us, or share some data which is aggregated? It makes sense to share aggregated data from the also from the point of view that there needs to be less storage, and this is just economical. The ethical review board approval might be not as cumbersome for the study, which actually does not need to collect the exact location of participants, for example, for geolocation, for Google location history, and also protects the privacy of the participants. So on that note, I would like to thank you for your attention and point out a couple of events that are coming up. So there's a mass workshop on mobile apps and sensors in surveys in Manchester next week, and we are streaming the keynotes. And one of the keynotes is by Helen Nissenbaum, whose book Privacy in Context I mentioned. Another one is by Kate Cagney. So if you want to, you can go to the mass workshop website and look at the links for that. With my colleagues, I'm also working on a book, data collection with wearables, apps, and sensors, with Florian Koisch, Stephanie Ekman, and Heidi Geyer. So the first chapter is available online already. You can read up. And there's some activities, such as a short course taught by me and Peter Luktik at Ezra, and some sessions at Ezra. And finally, general online research conference in Germany, in Kassel. So please attend. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm happy to answer your questions now, or also you can drop me an email, contact me at any time.
Thank you, Bella. That was a really interesting presentation. Lots of things to consider, and it's great there's opportunities for people to find out more in upcoming events and sessions and so on. We'll hand over to questions now. So there's, well, one question, will you share the slides afterwards? Are you happy to share the slides? Yeah, so we can circulate them. The recording of the session will also be on the ESS YouTube channel, so if people want to watch that, they can. One other question, how do you weigh data to account for non-response rates? And how do you append personal information, e.g. socio-demographic characteristics, to big data coming from devices? So 2 questions there, really.
So in this particular example, we did not weigh the data. So we did not use weighting here, but this is, of course, something that can be done, especially if you're starting with a probability-based sample where you have the characteristic and you have the characteristics of respondents and non-respondents from a frame, or well, in this situation, we are in a luxury situation where Statistics Netherlands has a registry, but yeah, we did not use weighting. How do you append personal information, so demographic characteristics, to big data coming from devices? So there, basically, we start. So this design big data perspective that I was talking about is starting from a survey. So with these data donation studies, actually, thank you for this question. That's an important point, I think, to make, is that these participants also start from a short survey. Center data, or we had a couple of other pilots, was a online access panel where their characteristics are either known by the provider of the data, or we ask them in the questionnaire. And also to look into biases, then one would want to ask some questions about self-report. So for example, about owning a vehicle or working from home, if you want to look at mobility and so forth.
Great, thank you. So yeah, keep the questions coming. I don't think there's any more at the moment, but please do ask. Maybe I can ask one in the meantime. I thought the results on the understanding the consent question were really interesting. I guess a small proportion who sort of correctly understood everything. But I guess there is a lot there to understand, and it's interesting, the relationship with the education level. So I guess the information is often quite complex, which means I see more highly educated people are more likely to understand it, and therefore more likely to give consent, which means that I guess less educated people are less likely to be included. So you mentioned a bit about the work being done on that. I mean, I think one of the things you said was to look at the length of that. Is there a challenge where you don't want to make it so long so people can't understand it, or so complex, but there's certain information that you have to include to make sure people are aware? So how do you kind of go about balancing that challenge?
Yes, so we work with the law scholars from University of Amsterdam who look over this text, right, and tell us what needs to be there, also to be compliant with GDPR. It's not just maybe about the length, right? It's also about how you present it. Do you split it on several screens, right? Or do you present it all at once, and so forth? But indeed, this is a challenge to present everything you want to, and also lower the burden of the participant to consent. This challenge actually carries over for the donation as well. So on the one hand, you want to present the information to the participants so that they know what they're sharing, but at the same time, it can also be easily overwhelming, which can also be connected to maybe their technological affinity, but also education. So these are the questions that we are currently working on. I'll have more answers shortly.
Sure. Do you I mean, when you get these results, do you share them with the legal teams who are kind of advising on the wording and say, well, actually, we know we need to provide this wording, but people don't understand it, and how do they react to that?
Well, that's why we are basically looking into whether this is also data specific, right? So Google location history, for example, or group specific. Sure. So we are doing it with different populations. So you could think of teenagers, for example, right? School children, and we are repeating these quizzes with true or false questions and don't knows to have a better understanding. And the legal scholars are working with us to understand what needs to be changed, right? We first need to understand where the problem is. Yeah. So yeah, that's what we can can report on in the next 1.5 years, I think.
Okay, yeah, really interesting. Okay, so one more question come in. Great talk. Do you see any quality issues in respondents being able to edit their data?
Great question. So in a way, this can, of course, be a risk. So if a participant decides to delete some data, they are producing missing data, and this is not missing at random, probably. But at the same time, GDPR provision is that people, so especially if it's some special category information or sensitive information, people need to have a chance not to share it. So the decision could be, okay, not sharing anything, right? So just closing the window if a participant doesn't want to, or deleting certain pieces of data. And this is, again, a kind of a point for research or discussion, which is better. In another sense, like to approach it from the other point of view, if you think about surveys and self-reports, their respondents just share with researchers whatever they want to share with them, right? So basically, they already control the information. And of course, the social desirability is a problem. Or when taking pictures of the receipts, this can also be selectivity, social desirability involved. So I think that it solves this problem of social desirability only in part, but there's a trade-off, right, between self-presentation, positive self-presentation, and also this transparency and what is ethical. So I think, again, we need to strike a balance there.
Thank you. If anyone else has any questions, please do type them in the Q&A. One other thing I wanted to ask, Bella, was just on the results of the household budget survey. I think you shared the experiment that compared whether people were kind of promised feedback or not, and that didn't have an impact. But everyone received the feedback. I think it was just whether they were promised that was a condition. Have you ever looked at kind of whether they receive feedback or not? I just wondered if that has an impact on kind of continued reporting. If you're asking people to report like every day or every week or something, if you're giving them feedback versus not giving them feedback, are they more likely to report? Is that something you've looked at?
So we haven't looked at it yet because there's so much data. You can imagine that this is like the data that comes out of this sensor studies. You could write multiple dissertations on it, and actually there are PhD students who are writing up the results of different experiments. So I do hope that in the near future we will look into this because this also is very interesting to me. I do some research on panel conditioning, so this is a little bit changing the behavior as a result of feedback.
Yeah,
but no results at the moment.
Okay, that'll be interesting. Right, so just I don't see any more questions coming in. I'll just wait a few more seconds to see maybe one final question comes in before we close. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to share in the meantime, Bella.
No, just if you have any questions, any of the participants, thank you so much for being here. And if anything comes up, feel free to shoot me an email anytime.
Great, thank you. And we can share the slides and the recording will be on the YouTube if you want to share it with anyone else. So thanks everyone for your attendance and participation today. I hope you have a nice rest of the day. Yeah, we'll see you at another webinar shortly, a bit later in the year. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.